Thank you for joining us. We're going to go ahead and get started for the sake of being on time. My name is Ty Amy, and I'm here with my wife as always.
Hello, thank you for joining us.
We're going to go through the Amy approach to advocating tonight. Once again, we're talking about advocating for change by fighting the good fight. This is self-advocacy training for parents developed by the Amy Educational Advocates in conjunction with the law offices of Nicole Hodge Amy. Like we said in the invite, today we're going to be talking about services. We've been going through the I.E.P. and trying to inform everyone and make sure you have a depth of knowledge of what's going on in the I.E.P. process. Today we're going to spend some time talking about services because selecting services is what's going to drive success. A little bit about me, a little bit of my background. The biggest thing I want everyone to know is my passion for education. I've spent time in the classroom as a teacher, learned a lot in that time, observed a lot in that time, also the son of a teacher. So education is very important to us in our household.
Hi, I'm Nicole Amy. I am an attorney and co-owner of Amy Educational Advocates. I am a native of California, and I'm also the daughter of a teacher. My mother worked as a retired resource teacher, and I used to substitute for special education classrooms in both resource and SDC. So I've been in education for over 20 years.
Outstanding. So yes, we bring a depth of knowledge and experience in education and also in advocating and fighting for clients with their special education needs against school districts. Let's take a look at our agenda today. We're going to walk through and discuss some of the more common services out there. The list of services is long. For the sake of time, we're not going to cover every one in depth tonight, but we're going to spend a little bit of time to go in depth on some of the more common services that we see. We're going to discuss the difference between direct and consultative services. We're going to discuss the difference between push-in versus pull-out services. We'll take a little time to look at the numbers because in all things when it comes to the I.E.P., the numbers are what really tell the tale on what you are receiving. And finally, we'll allow some time for some Q&A. So services. If you didn't attend our last webinar when we talked about setting SMART goals, we kind of introduced services and their importance in the I.E.P. Services come from good goals. Good SMART goals are going to drive our services, and then services are what's going to drive the growth of your child and their development and performance when it comes to their I.E.P. Some of the common services that we see when it comes to I.E.Ps and special education are
Academic, speech and language services, occupational therapy, behavioral services, physical therapy, assistive and adaptive technology, transportation, a related service.
So like I said, these are just a few of the more common services that we decided to spend some time on tonight. There are going to be, we'll do other webinars where we discuss some of the other services, and we'll touch on a little bit at the end some of the services that are common in the I.E.P. But to start off with.
So for academic services, there are a multitude of ways academic services can be given to a student. One way is through tutoring, and that would be something that occurs. It could occur inside of the classroom. It could occur outside of the classroom, after school, before school. And the variety of academic services is huge because they're provided inside of the classroom, outside of the classroom, and to help the student participate and learn in the general ed or the special education classrooms, as well as to participate in the same curriculum with their typically performing peers. The accommodations that we have to help students achieve academic services would be preferential seating. Sometimes a child might be set at the front of the classroom. They might be given additional time to complete work. So if there's a test or homework, maybe instead of them having 50 minutes to do it, maybe they'll get 60 minutes, or it's based on that child's needs, modification of work. So sometimes a child might have to do a specific set of problems. Maybe sometimes we have reduction of work where instead of them having to do 12 problems, they'll just do 3 to show competency.
Also, some children might require both written and verbal directions in the classroom. This is an accommodation that we often see in IEPs implemented in the classroom, where the teacher might just usually give the entire class verbal instructions or directions. They also need to hand maybe some written directions and instructions for children to make sure that they have the time to actually digest what the instructions or directions are. We've also seen a note taker be assigned as part of accommodations. Schools have also made books available on tape and made other materials in alternative formats so that your child or that the child can access education. Accommodations can be very broad. It's a long range of accommodations. And really, this is where that individualized part of the IEP comes in. Whatever your child's needs are, or the needs of the child that you are representing or advocating for, whatever their needs are, there are some accommodations that can be made for them.
And it's important that a parent track the services, make sure they're happening. You know, you can ask your child, ask the teacher if the accommodations are being implemented and if they're working. And then you know if changes need to be made.
Continuing on academic services, we also have
direct class support. So in this direct class support, you might have a teacher, a resource teacher, or some qualified teacher or an aide who will come and support the child inside of the classroom. We have one, consultant teacher services. So sometimes the resource teacher or some other service provider will come and help the teacher identify ways to support the child inside of the classroom. And then we have integrated co-teaching would be an example would be a resource teacher will come to the class and work with the classroom teacher, and then they would both work together to deliver instruction to a child. And integrated, you know, that takes some time, and the teachers would have to get together and work prior to the classroom beginning so that they are both able to deliver instruction. And then it benefits even the general education class students because now you have instruction being delivered in different modalities.
Another academic service that you might see is a one-on-one aid. Of course, this is something that's very sought after, not always necessary, but definitely one of the academic services that you might see. And with academic services, it's important to understand that they are available in push-in and pull-out format. We'll talk a little bit more about the difference between push-in and pull-out, but we just want to go through every service that we discuss. We're going to let you know how they're available, and these academic services are available by push-in and pull-out.
So for speech and language services, speech and language, that's designed to improve the communication skills in order for your child to access their education. And there are many ways that speech and language is necessary for a child to participate in the curriculum. Articulation, sometimes if a child has language and is unintelligible to everyone, they might be hesitant to speak out in class, so then their classroom participation is impacted.
You know, it's funny, I'll share a little story. Our son actually had this issue when he struggled with his T's, I believe. He was pretty tight-tongued.
No, he struggled with R's.
R's.
He struggled with sometimes tease, but he had a lot of articulation needs.
And as soon as we got him speech and language services, and they corrected those, boy, did he start talking and talking and talking. So articulation services will, often benefit your child with their confidence, which is important as well.
And then we have expressive and receptive language disorder. So, a child might have difficulty how they understand and receive language and how they express language. And there are speech services for both those disorders. Resonance or voice disorders. So sometimes the sound production has the child might have difficulty with sound production, and the speech teacher can work on that. Maybe the child might speak very low, and they need to learn how to speak a little at a higher or a more have more sound in their speech. Feeding disorders. Some children might have like swallowing difficulties or difficulties in how they are able to eat, and speech and language pathologists work on that too, and help the child get over those feeding disorders.
Speech and language services can be delivered direct to your child or can also be delivered in a consultative manner. We'll discuss that a little bit, the difference between those two later in the webinar. And also, speech and language services can be provided in a push in and or pull out manner. All right, our next service that we're going to spend a little time discussing, another pretty common service that we see, is occupational therapy. Occupational therapy is therapy for performance of everyday activities needed to access education. You'll find that you'll notice that whenever we discuss these services, we're always going to reference it to how they relate and why it's important, because the need for your child to access their education. Certain things when it comes to access to their education that might need to be worked on with occupational therapy is the grip on the writing utensil. We've had clients that we've worked with and students where their ability to properly hold the writing utensil really impacts their ability to write, which would obviously impact their ability to work in a time manner that keeps up with their peers. We've also had clients that they have issues with their hands and their grip to where it's difficult for them to turn pages in a book. So it's something that an occupational therapist might work with them on. And then also something like using scissors. As with our previous services, as with speech and language, occupational therapy can be provided both directly to your child or in a consultative manner. And also, occupational therapy can be provided in a push-in, where they're in the classroom, or pull-out manner. Our next service that we want to spend some time discussing,
behavioral.
This is a pretty big one, and it's kind of multifaceted. We're going to try to keep it as simple as possible as we cover some of the top line stuff when it comes to behavioral. So behavioral services are designed to help your child control their behaviors in order for them to access their education. I'm going to say that again. Control their behaviors in order for them to access their education.
Right. And so there are many different types of behaviors that would impede a child from learning. Maybe the child fidgets or walks or is distracted. There's so many different behaviors that could impair a child's ability to participate in the classroom instruction.
A lot of times we see children that might have ADHD or somewhere on the autism spectrum. They typically have some behaviors that they've developed as they're coping with their disability. One of the things that can be developed and should be developed if your child has behaviors is a
behavior intervention plan, or sometimes a behavior support plan. You want to intervene in the behaviors to do things to help prevent the behavior before they happen.
So you'll hear that referred to as a BIP sometimes when you hear them discussing services or discussing what they're going to do. A behavior intervention plan. Now, a lot of the services, when it comes to behavioral services, are going to be delivered by, or you hope to have them delivered by. You hope to have them delivered by, I should say,
A board certified behavior analyst.
or BCBA.
Yeah, now that's sometimes that might be a challenge to get, but that is what, you know, we would all like, because these people are trained in analyzing behavior and developing strategies to change.
So you would definitely like them to be, if nothing else, you want them to be a part in the development of the behavior intervention or behavior support plan, because you want their level of expertise. If you can get access to them in a more one-on-one and direct manner, because behavioral services can be provided in a direct and or consultative manner, and are also provided in push in and pull out. So if you can get a BCBA to be a part, or you're at a school where they have a BCBA on campus, you're going to benefit, and your behavioral services will probably be at a higher standard. Our next service that we want to discuss:
physical therapy. And again, these are services designed to improve strength and function of the body so that your child can access their education. So, a child might need help sitting straight in the chair, a variety of things, muscular skeletal issues. And it's physical therapy is frequently for children who have physical disabilities. And this can also be provided in a direct or a consultative manner, where the physical therapist comes in and teaches the teachers or the aides in strategies to help the child participate from a physical therapy standpoint. That doesn't mean the teacher is going to be providing physical therapy, but it does mean they will be giving support to the child on that area.
Typically, you won't have physical therapy happening in the classroom or in the learning environment. So if there are direct services needed, that's going to happen in a pull-out manner. Consultative services, as Nicole was mentioning, is something where they would talk to any teacher that's working with the child to make sure any of the things that they're working on can be carried into the classroom are being mirrored in the classroom. All righty, our next service: assistive and adaptive technology, or AT, as you'll hear them say in the IEP. AT are services that involve providing technological devices that allow your child to, once again, access their education. The key to the IEP is what's allowing them and what's helping them access their education. Some of these devices could be something like computers or tablets, which is actually kind of the norm now that we're having all this distant learning going on. And there are also specific note-taking devices that might be given to children that might need them in order to allow them to take notes in a manner that allows them to stay up to speed with their peers in a classroom setting.
Right, and then we have items like speech to text, so the child might be able to speak into something and text is written, or a child will have a adaptive technology device where they are pictures, a picture exchange system, where they can hit pictures and the device speaks the words for the child.
So these are just a couple of the AT devices that we can think of that's provided in services. There are others. Once again, there's a pretty limitless list of things. It all depends on what your child needs and what device may be out there to support your child. With AT services, they are also available and provided directly to your child or in a consultative manner as well. And also, push in and pull out are available when it comes to AT. Our last service that we're going to talk about in depth today is transportation. Now, transportation services cover transportation to and from school or any services deemed necessary for your child to once again access their education. We wanted to make sure we discuss transportation in this manner because a lot of times people are not aware that if your child is required to get services that are not provided at the school, then the district is responsible for making sure your child can get to and from those services. They can do this in two ways. Sometimes they can provide direct transportation where they may have buses, or we've even dealt with small school districts that have contracts with taxi companies to provide transportation to children. So there's direct ways that the school districts can provide transportation, or if all else comes to fail, they can also reimburse you because, like I said, the responsibility is theirs to cover that cost if it is a burden upon you and you are not able to do it for your child. So transportation services, excuse me, I'm sorry.
Oh, even if the parent can do it for their child.
Even if the parent can do it, it's still on them. A lot of times people just, I can do it. It's not an issue. If you wanted to pursue it, it's on them to make sure that they are covering the costs for transportation and any services that your child needs to receive in order for them to access their education. All right. So now that we've discussed a little bit in depth some of the more common services, let's talk about services in general and talk about the difference between direct and consultative services. Because a lot of times, if you aren't sure the difference between the two, you can be under the impression that your child is receiving a whole lot of hours of services and attention when really all they're receiving is some consultative services. So let's talk about the difference. So with direct services, these are services that are delivered directly to your child.
And direct services may be provided across multiple learning environments, including the home. So that could be the playground, the cafeteria, inside of the classroom, in the music room, art classes if they have different classes. So multiple environments.
Directly provided to your child. So this is when the service provider is working directly with your child. Now, just because they're direct services, you should understand that these services can still also be provided in a group setting. But these are services that are still being provided directly to your child from the service provider. This is in difference to consultative services. Consultative services are services that are delivered to staff and personnel that work with your child.
Right. So that means the speech teacher, if the speech teacher is on consult, that means she's coming to talk with the teacher. The I.E.P will indicate the frequency. And so it's more an advisory role. And the speech teacher would not be working directly with the child. And that could be the occupational therapist, whatever service provider there would not be working with your child if it is consult only. So you would want to have consult and direct.
Well, what we see is a lot of services, like when we look at consultative services, this is used when the I.E.P team believes that the tools and supports that your child needs doesn't need to be implemented all the time or just by that person. A lot of times you'll see that services grow and they develop from direct into consultative after the service provider has spent time kind of remediating the child and getting them to a place where now the teacher can take over and just kind of make sure the child is continuing to implement the things that they've been worked with and taught to do.
And then I think part of that reason could be if they don't want the child to be removed from the classroom, they want to limit the classroom removals.
And that's where the LRE comes in our bullet point. We want the child to be in the least restrictive environment. And when you start talking about pulling out the child in order to give them services, that's classroom time that they're missing. So the goal is to try to keep them in the least restrictive environment with all the supports that they need, which means that some services can be and should be working themselves to a point where they're being delivered in a consultative manner. And like I said, often used after direct services have been provided. And then now we're backing off, and that way we can make sure the child is getting as much classroom time as possible. So that's the difference between direct and consultative services. Now, let's take a little time to talk about the difference between push in and pull out. Well, push in,
Services where the service providers go into the learning environment to provide the services. So a resource teacher would come into the classroom and give the services to the child, or the speech teacher would come in and give services, occupational therapist. So many of these services could be provided inside of the classroom because they would be supporting whatever the teacher is doing. So if the child is having to write something, the occupational therapist can come in and provide support to that child while the writing is going on.
push-in services are great because they make sure that the child is remaining in the least restrictive environment compared to pulling them out of the classroom setting and bringing them in an environment that's a little bit more restrictive in a one-on-one setting or in a smaller group settings. The goal is to always try to keep your child, if they can function in a general education setting, we want to keep them in there as much as possible. So when push-in services can be provided, it helps to support that versus pull out. But the thing about push-in services, they can be difficult for some kids. We've seen that a lot of kids balk at push-in services because they don't want their peers to see them receiving services in class.
And if my mother was a resource teacher, she would do a lot of push in, and she would try to help all of the students so that the children would not feel singled out, because she'd say, if I'm working with everybody, then this one child is not feeling like, oh, they're only here for me. So, there are strategies parents and the team can come up with if you have a child who doesn't want that push in because they're feeling like they're being very noticeable.
It's definitely positives and negatives to both. Now, when we look at pull out, this is where services where a child is being pulled out of the normal learning environment in order to receive the service. Sometimes pull out is necessary. Sometimes you need to get the child in a one-on-one setting in order to be able to provide the service. So it's a good thing when needed. But understand that the more you're pulling the kid out of class, the less classroom time and classroom education they're receiving. And that goes against the goal, which is, once again, to maintain the least restrictive environment for your child. But the good thing about pull out is that it allows for that one-on-one delivery of the direct service to your child. So it's really concentrated and delivered in a very poignant manner.
Right, and then it's hopefully would be free of distractions that would occur in the classroom, with 20 to 30 other children. So we would hope that the child would benefit from that one-on-one delivery.
All right, and like we said, it may force your child to miss other classroom activities just because of scheduling. Sometimes, service providers, they have a very heavy caseload, so they're not able to pull out your child in a time where it fits directly with what that classroom is doing. So they might miss some math time because they're being pulled out to work on some speech and language issues in a one-on-one setting. So these are the things that you have to balance when developing the services part of your child's I.E.P, because you don't want them to lose and miss because of them trying to receive these services. All righty. Finally, the numbers. I'm a numbers guy. So I always want to make sure, because a lot of times we see when we go to I.E.Ps and we're working with clients and we're advocating, we'll listen to the I.E.P team discuss all these different goals and services, and all these numbers and acronyms start jumping up. And on the surface, it will look like, oh, wow, you're doing a whole lot for my child. But you have to make sure you understand and really delve down deeply into what it's saying. So an example of what you might see written in an I.E.P in the service is like your child is going to receive 200 minutes, 5 days for 1,000 minutes weekly. That's a lot of minutes. And this example came from a child that was actually spending this much time in the resource room classroom outside of the normal classroom setting for their grade. They were spending 200 minutes a day, 5 days a week over in the resource classroom, which was 1,000 minutes weekly. Now, if we look at this, or we look at the example of 50 minutes a day, 50 minutes times 5 days are 250 minutes weekly. The big part when you look at your I.E.P is determining whether or not these are direct services are consultative services, because you could have a teacher or you could have like a service provider that's meeting 30 minutes once a day with the general education teacher, and you're looking at, oh, okay, my kid is getting 30 minutes a week of services. No, the teacher is having a 30-minute meeting a week with the service provider, and then they are taking that information and trying to implement it in the classroom when needed or when possible. So this is an important part of looking at the numbers. If anyone on here, or if you have any questions and are looking at your IEP in your services section and you don't understand it clearly,
And yeah, I would think 200 minutes a day resource room, that child might need to be in a special day class.
might need to just change placement.
Yeah, because you've pretty much changed the placement and removed the child from the classroom all day. So and that's why these numbers matter, because when you add them up and make them into a total, you'll understand like, well, how much services is my child actually needing and how much are they getting?
And how can this, what's the reality that all this can be provided? Sometimes they're unrealistic numbers that put the district in a position where they can never even fulfill what they're writing. So you really want to dig into the numbers when you start talking about, here's the service we're going to provide. How much are you going to provide? How is this going to impact their amount of time in the general education setting? How is this going to impact what they might be missing in the classroom time if they're being pulled out for services? Or you want to make sure that if your child needs direct services, that the services aren't written in a consultative way. Like I said in the beginning, there's so many different services out there. We only want to spend some time tonight to try to keep this under an hour, speaking on going into depth on a few, but we did want to take some time to list some of the other services that you might see in the IEP, such as counseling. This is another pretty big one. We probably could have spent some time on counseling, where kids that might have ED,
A variety of different things. Sometimes kids with autism, with emotional disturbance, with ADHD, with anxiety. There are a variety of different reasons why a child might need counseling.
There's also audiological is what I should have put.
Audiology.
Yeah. Services where, working directly with the child on making sure they're able to process and hear correctly. Counseling is not just limited to your child. There's also parent counseling available. That's something that's deemed necessary in order to, better your ability to work with your child through some of the things that they're going through. We have school health, and I'll go ahead and link in school social work with that. There's doctors and nurses on site that can provide medication if needed. No doctors, I'm sorry, nurses, school nurses on site that can provide like medication if needed. Then there are social workers that can be assigned to schools that are assigned to some schools already, that can also work with you and your family and your child. Orientation and mobility is another service that's out there.
And then sometimes children might have difficulty accessing the school itself. So, can they walk up the ramps and the stairs? And so you want to know.
Access to elevators. A lot of times if a school has an elevator, they don't allow everyone to just use it. So there might be a special key that your child needs in order to be able to access the elevator in order for them to access the campus. There's therapeutic recreation and adapted PE, adaptive physical education. I'm actually subbed that class before.
Adaptive PE?
Adaptive PE. We had it at a high school that I subbed that. And it was just a classroom, with kids that had different disabilities and they had their aids. And we ran the curriculum to allow them to exercise in the manner that they could, depending on what their different abilities were. So it was an interesting class. So all these different services are available for you and your child to access in the IEP. With that, we want to open up to any questions that might be out there. One of the questions that we had?
One of our questions was, how can a parent keep track of the services?
Ah, that's a good one. Though. They have service logs, don't they?
They should have service logs. And as a parent, you can make a request. You should make a request for the service logs and track and see how often speech is being provided, because sometimes things come up and the speech teachers, there are not enough of them and they can't possibly give the child all of those minutes. So when you look at the logs, you can see how much is missing, then you can get, the district has to make up those missing minutes.
You can get compensatory education for services missing. And like Nicole was saying, things happen. People get sick, people get fired, staffing issues. So there's requesting and making sure that, especially if there's any pullout, if services are being given in a pullout manner, you definitely want to make sure that they are tracking that so you can see, the amount of time that your child is missing in the regular education setting, and then making sure that those services are being provided during that time.
Okay, and how can a parent control whether a child has consult or direct services?
Can a parent really control that? I'll put that back to you.
I think that a parent, number one, does not have to agree to consult services. They can ask the district to prove why consult is better than direct. I think the parent has to identify what the needs of the child are. I think a lot of times, parents have different goals for their child. Some parents might want the child to be inside of the classroom more often. Others might, be more interested in those direct services and progress. And they feel like that one-to-one makes the progress. So I think the parent's role is to, hopefully we have good assessments, and the assessments will identify where the child is and what the child's needs are. And I feel like the assessment should drive and determine whether or not a parent or a child is getting direct consult. And so as a parent, you just have to make sure that the provision of services is based on the assessments, and have the district explain that to you. And then we have.
Does the district have a baseline on the numbers that they use?
And that again is based on assessments. The baseline should be created by the data, and that driven by the assessment. So we should know where the child begins at, which is the baseline. When they begin that school year, or that I.E.P. is written each year, we should have a baseline, and the district should be using a baseline, and that is how we were measuring our progress.
One of the things that you want to make sure you understand, a lot of times, like if you're just now getting into an IEP, typically in the beginning, there's going to be a need to really catch a child up. So you might see a higher number of services necessary, a higher number of hours necessary in the beginning, and that baseline, but then you'll see the hours come down as the services are provided, and that the child begins to get better at it.
Right. And I think I have an issue with that frequently, because the progress is being made based on the services provided. And so districts will often look at that progress and say, oh, well, they don't need these services, when it's the services that are helping that child make that progress. Says, during this virtual time, should the district get creative with services and goals? I think the district should get creative with the delivery of the services and goals. I mean, the goals are what they are. The goals should be driven by the assessments. So the goals shouldn't really be changed, but the creativity and the services can, as long as the parent identifies that they are working. There's just no amount of creativity that would allow occupational therapy to be delivered, online.
Yeah.
Perhaps speech Although I do know, when my children took speech, the speech teacher would have to touch their face and help them articulate certain sounds. So I mean, unless the speech teacher could teach the parent to do that, there are just certain things that are necessary. Behavioral counseling, a lot of times that needs to be done in person. So I mean, if people can be creative, they should. But I think some of these services are so.
When it comes to creative, one of the things that I will say is they need to be creative in a manner where they aren't dependent strictly on district staff. Being creative to me means looking outside of what they already have contracted with, because while districts and their staff that during this time, yeah, they have concerns and they should be safe, but there are providers out there that are comfortable with still providing in-person services. And that's where districts should be creative when it comes to making sure, because as Nicole mentioned, the goals of your child shouldn't change just because we're in a virtual setting. The services that your child needs doesn't change necessarily because we're in a virtual setting. So making sure and demand that the district be creative in providing those services are what you need to be fighting for as a parent. Yeah, they were trying to, and a lot of districts were trying to cut out, services during this time, saying that they weren't able to provide them with the distant learning. But if you fight and advocate for yourself, and this is what we find often across the spectrum, the closed mouth does not get fed. The squeaky wheel gets the oil when it comes to a lot of these services. If you go in there and fight and push for your child to receive what they need, they'll find a way. But if you quietly accept what they offer, what they give, or what they don't give, then they'll also just let that play out as well. All righty. Well, we pride ourselves in keeping these under an hour. We're going to be wrapping this up. Thank you for joining us this evening. One of the last things that we'll leave you with is get help. The truth of the matter is, a lot of times, if you don't have help, they just really just dismiss you as a parent, and they feel like they're the professional, so they don't have to listen to you and don't necessarily value your input. So you can contact us. We're special education advocates at Amy Educational Advocates, and we have the law firm, the law office of Nicole Hodge Amy, should we need to proceed in a more aggressive manner. We can be reached at the phone number below. Anyone that attended this webinar will receive a discount on any services provided. So if you need any help, get help. Thank you once again for joining us. We appreciate your time. Be blessed.
Thank you for joining.